Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive! It is the first Wednesday of the month. That means it is now time for Archival GMing, where I pick some general GMing related topic and talk about it. This month I am going system agnostic again for the political game. See, it does not matter whether you are dealing with the interclan politics in a Legend of the Five Rings Winter Court, dealing with the backstabbing politics of a Shadow Lord Sept in War of the Apocalypse, or are trying to deal with the Senate in a Star Wars game. There's always going to be some elements of politics in most games. And so I'm going to address what happens when you run a game where these politics aren't a backdrop, but are the whole game. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as I talk about the political game. The first step to running a political game is you have to decide what type of political game you're running. There are essentially two types of political games. The first type is the cooperative. This means the PCs are all on the same side. They might be all part of the same pack. They might all be part of the same clan. They're all part of one group that has a common agenda, a common goal. These are generally the easiest to run in that you're still dealing with the players as a single cohesive group. In these, you're going to populate the court with NPCs who are one side of the player's agenda versus the other. And the players are going to be trying to work the ones who are against them over to their side, eliminate those who are against them, bolster or strengthen those who are for them, and in other ways, just work as a cohesive group, pretty much just like any other sort of general storytelling adventures. And then you have the more difficult to run, the competitive player versus player sort of political game. In this one, the PCs are all different groups. They are not allied necessarily, and they have their own agendas. Now, this is really common in Legend of the Five Rings, where you'd have a case of they're all courtiers of different clans. Or Vampire the Masquerade, they're all different clans. This also tends to be very much the commonality in Vampire the Masquerade LARPs, because all the players are political groups, especially in the larger group games. But the thing to remember is these are more complicated. These are cases where you want to populate the court or the NPC arena with a large number of different NPCs. These are NPCs who are going to be foils or allies for all the different PCs. And you might have a case where two PCs are wanting the same NPC on their side, but for different reasons, or for different political goals. And you need to make sure that this NPC has their goals worked out, and you have to figure out not just what the goals of the PCs are, but what the goals of the NPCs are. Because they're going to be working against the PCs. We're working for them. And the PCs are trying to outcompete each other. They're trying to achieve their goals, and maybe they're working with some of the others to help them get theirs. But in many cases, their goals are going to be counter to each other. Say, for instance, there's been a war between the lion and the phoenix, and you've got a lion courtier and a phoenix courtier as PCs. Well, the phoenix courtier is going to be wanting to keep their gains. The lion courtier is going to be wanting to keep their gains. And so these two are going to be butting heads, fighting against each other tooth and nail in the courts, trying to secure their own goals. Meanwhile, say the crane is seeing this, and he's seeing, well, I really like it if the lion didn't get this back, because we're allies with the crane, and they might be able to talk them into giving us that instead of giving it to the lion. And so the crane are starting to slip in there. Now, that can be something caused by players. It can be something caused by GM NPCs. Because politics at that level, where everyone's got their own agendas, is not necessarily going to be straightforward. NPCs are going to shape what's going on. PCs might find themselves getting directives from their superiors if they're in a game where there's a hierarchy. And that's what you as a GM have to be thinking about. You have to be keeping track not only of what all the PCs are doing, but what all the NPCs are doing in such a game. This is why some games use the concept of relationship mapping, where you put all the PCs, all the NPCs on a grid, and you kind of draw arrows to who's friends, who's allies, what do they think of each other, all that stuff. But that is still always kind of tricky to keep track of, especially in games where that can change through the right gifts, the right whispers, the right supernatural applications, or just the right threats, depending on what game system you're talking about. But politics are fun games to run. They're tricky, and I'm not sure I really gave a good overview in this, but these are how I approach them. I always start with the type of game, and then I start with the NPCs. Because those two things set up your court, your Elysium, your Sept, whatever you are running in. And those set up the challenges for the players, in addition to whatever goals the players themselves formulate. Because that's the other thing with a political game. Even if it's a cooperative game, you need to encourage the PCs to come up with their own goals as well. I mean, sure, maybe they're representatives from another sept in that Shadowlord sept, and they're trying to negotiate a treaty for aid. But you know what? Maybe they're also decide to do something about the issues with the Shadow Lords treating the kinfolk bad, or the poor treatment of, say, the Bone Gnars, or maybe the Septs treating the Bone Gnars really well, and the PCs want to do something about that, to make the Shadow Lords treat the Bone Gnars poorly for whatever reason. Maybe there's some really strong warriors among the Bone Gnars, and they've earned great respect among the Shadow Lords. But the PCs want to give those Bone Gnars an excuse to come to their sept. So maybe framing the Bone Gnars in such a way that the Shadow Lords start treating them poorly again. That could be something that the PCs entirely decide to do on their own. And you need to expect that. You need to be prepared for that. That's why you need to know what your sept population is, what your court's population is. I mean, if you've got a bunch of crane magistrates coming into a winter court, they're going to be trying to push the agenda of the crane. But at the same time, they're going to be pushing whatever their family agendas are. For instance, if there's an Asahina among them, they're probably going to be trying to push for a demilitarization of anything going on, or a de-escalation of any conflicts, while a Daidaji would be trying to push for a escalation in a way facing away from the crane. And a Doji would just be trying to make allies. And they're all operating cooperatively, but they've all got their own different agendas, their own different personal agendas. And of course, this gets amplified many times when you do a PvP political game. So I hope this discussion gives you some ideas, both as a GM and, if you're a player listening to this, a player, for what sort of things you can look to do in a political game. And I hope that if there's anything more people would like to know, feel free to ask in the comments. More questions, more I can set up a future GMing tips video focusing on answering those. Now, I have my regularly scheduled videos the rest of the week. Until those videos come up, I just like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.